Have you ever been made to feel small by someone who was supposed to be your biggest supporter? What happens when the person who shattered your confidence is forced to watch you rise from the ashes, more powerful and celebrated than they ever imagined? Tonight's story is about Naomi, a woman whose ex-husband discarded her for a newer, shinier model, believing she was nothing without him. He thought he had won. But at the most glamorous event of the year, in front of everyone who mattered, he's about to discover that his greatest mistake wasn't just letting her go. It was failing to see the queen he'd cast aside. The invitation felt like a weighted stone in Naomi Rossi's hand. It was thick, cream-colored cardstock, the kind that cost more than her weekly grocery budget used to. The calligraphy was a deep, shimmering gold, spelling out an event that was the crown jewel of New York City's social calendar: the Starlight Gala at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. For most, this was a dream ticket. For Naomi, it was a summons to face the ghost she had spent the last 2 years trying to exorcise. Her small floral design studio in Greenwich Village was a world away from the Met Gala's opulence. It was her sanctuary, a fragrant chaos of eucalyptus, ranunculus, and half-finished sketches. This was where she had rebuilt herself, petal by petal. After her divorce from Ethan Hayes, she had been left with little more than a shattered sense of self-worth, and his parting words echoing in her ears. "You're a sweet girl, Bella, but you lack ambition. You're happy in the background. You need someone like me to matter." He had been wrong, terribly, painfully wrong. It turned out she didn't need him to matter. She needed to be without him to find out who she was. The woman who arranged flowers for their dinner parties, who ghost-wrote his charming speeches, who put her own art degree on a shelf to support his burgeoning finance career. That woman was a faded photograph. The Naomi who stood here today was different. She was the owner of Petale, a boutique studio gaining a cult following for its avant-garde floral installations that blurred the line between nature and sculpture. Still, the invitation sent a tremor of the old fear through her. She knew Ethan would be there. He lived for these events, a stage on which to perform his success. And he would have his new wife, Tiffany, clinging to his arm. Tiffany Sterling, a woman who was everything Naomi wasn't: polished, ruthless, and born into a family whose name was etched onto the very buildings that hosted events like this. "You're going!" Naomi jumped, nearly knocking over a vase of delicate sweet peas. Her best friend and part-time assistant, Chloe, stood in the doorway, a knowing smirk on her face. "Absolutely not," Naomi said, tossing the invitation onto her cluttered work table. "Can you imagine? I'd have to watch Tiffany parade around in a $1 million gown while Ethan looks at me with that pitying little smile he perfected. No, thank you. I'd rather deep clean the walk-in cooler." Chloe plucked the invitation from the mess. "Naomi Rossi, the Starlight Gala. This isn't a request. It's a command from the universe. Besides," she added, her eyes twinkling, "it's not just any invitation, is it? It's a GOH pass. Guest of honor." Chloe was right. This wasn't a standard ticket she'd bought or been gifted. It was different. A few months ago, she'd received a cryptic commission through an art curator. A private, anonymous benefactor wanted a series of centerpiece installations for a major gala. The theme was ephemeral beauty. The budget was staggering. The instructions were to let her creativity run wild. She'd poured her soul into it, creating living sculptures of cascading orchids and rare, night-blooming cereus, all woven into delicate wireframes that seemed to defy gravity. She had delivered them to the museum that morning, never meeting the mysterious client. This pass was her thank you. "It doesn't matter," Naomi insisted, her voice small. "I don't belong there anymore." "Anymore?" Chloe scoffed, stepping over a bucket of delphiniums. "You never went as you. You went as Ethan Hayes' quiet, agreeable wife, the one who was told her dress was a little much, or that her opinions on art were quaint. You went as an accessory. This time you're going as the featured artist, the talent, the woman who made the entire place beautiful." Naomi looked around her studio. Her hands, stained with chlorophyll and marked with tiny scratches from rose thorns, were the hands of a creator. Ethan had always hated them, pushing her to get manicures to cover up the evidence of her hobby. He'd called her floral work a hobby, something to keep her busy, while he did the important work of making money. He never saw the complex structural engineering in her designs, the deep understanding of color theory, the sheer artistry it took to make something so beautiful. The memory of one particularly cruel night surfaced. She had been ecstatic after a local gallery offered to display one of her early pieces. When she told Ethan, he'd barely looked up from his phone. "That's nice, honey," he'd said, a dismissive wave in his voice. "Just make sure it doesn't interfere with the Henderson dinner party on Friday. I need you to be on your game." She had quietly canceled the gallery show. A surge of anger, hot and clean, burned away some of the fear. Chloe was right. Why was she still letting his voice dictate her life? He was a phantom limb, an ache where something had been amputated. It was time for the ache to stop. "What would I even wear?" she asked, the question a fragile white flag of surrender. Chloe's grin was predatory. "Oh, honey, we're not just going. We're going to make an entrance. We're going to remind that man and the entire city what a masterpiece he was too blind to see." Over the next 2 days, the studio transformed into a war room. Chloe was a brilliant general, marshaling their limited resources. Naomi didn't have a Tiffany Sterling budget, but she had something better: creativity. She pulled out a simple, floor-length silk gown in a deep midnight blue she'd bought from a consignment shop years ago, but never had the courage to wear. It was elegant, but it needed something more. It needed her. With the meticulous focus of a surgeon, Naomi began to work. She hand-dyed tiny silk petals in shades of silver and iridescent white. She attached them to a nearly invisible mesh, creating a cascade of blossoms that seemed to drift over one shoulder and down her back. It was like a living extension of the very installation she'd created for the gala, a piece of her art, worn on her skin. When she finally put it on, standing before the cracked mirror in her studio, she didn't see Ethan's timid ex-wife. She saw Naomi Rossi, the artist, and for the first time in a long time, she felt ready. Not for a fight, but for a debut. Her own. The limousine, a luxury Chloe had insisted upon. You can't arrive at your own coronation in a taxi. Purred to a stop in front of the illuminated steps of the Metropolitan Museum of Art. A river of couture gowns and tailored tuxedos flowed up the grand staircase, a glittering human tide under the relentless flash of paparazzi cameras. For a moment, Naomi's breath caught in her throat. The scale of it, the sheer, unapologetic wealth, was suffocating. The old insecurities whispered at the edges of her mind. "You don't belong here. They can all see you're a fraud." She felt Chloe's hand on her arm, a small, grounding pressure. "Your art is in there," Chloe whispered fiercely. "You belong here more than any of them." Taking a deep breath, Naomi stepped out of the car. The cool night air hit her bare shoulders. She ignored the photographers, their lenses like 100 hungry eyes, and focused on the top of the steps. She moved with a grace she didn't know she possessed, the silk of her gown whispering against the pavement. The handcrafted floral applique on her shoulder caught the light, shimmering like captured moonlight. And a few of the photographers, noticing something unique, turned their cameras on her. Inside, the great hall was breathtaking. It was a forest of human artistry and her own. Her installations were everywhere. They rose from the centers of tables, great sculptural bursts of white and green. They cascaded from balconies, delicate tendrils of jasmine and orchid that perfumed the air. People were gathered around them, murmuring in appreciation, taking photos. A wave of profound, dizzying pride washed over Naomi. They were looking at her soul, and they thought it was beautiful. She was so absorbed in the sight that she didn't notice them until they were right in front of her. "Well, well, look what the cat dragged in." The voice was like fingernails on a chalkboard. "Ethan." He stood there, impeccably dressed in a Tom Ford tuxedo, looking every bit the master of the universe he believed himself to be. And beside him, practically fused to his arm, was Tiffany. She was draped in a garish, bright red gown covered in sequins that seemed to scream for attention. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a severe tight bun, and her lips were painted the same aggressive red as her dress. "Ethan, Tiffany," Naomi said, her voice even and calm. She was surprised at her own composure. Ethan's eyes swept over her, a flicker of something unreadable. Surprise? Annoyance? Before his signature smirk settled into place. I have to admit, Bella, I'm surprised to see you here. Did you cater the event? I hope they're paying you well for the flower arrangements. He gestured vaguely at one of her towering creations, the condescension dripping from his words. Tiffany let out a high, tinkling laugh that didn't reach her cold, calculating eyes. Oh, Ethan, be nice. She's trying. It's a cute little hobby. It must be so thrilling for you to see how the other half lives for a night. Her gaze raked over Naomi's dress, and her perfectly glossed lip curled slightly. Did you make that yourself? It's very crafty. Every word was a carefully aimed dart, designed to puncture her confidence and remind her of the place they believed she belonged. The old Naomi would have shrunk. She would have mumbled an apology and fled. But as she stood there, surrounded by the tangible proof of her talent and hard work, their words felt hollow. They were firing at a ghost. I'm glad you like my work, Ethan, she said, looking directly at him. Her voice was quiet, but it cut through his smugness. And yes, Tiffany, I did design the dress. I find it so much more fulfilling to create something beautiful than to simply buy it. The barb hit its mark. Tiffany's smile tightened. She was a woman defined by labels and price tags. The idea of creating something from scratch was as alien to her as humility. Ethan, sensing his new wife's discomfort, stepped in to reassert his dominance. Don't get ahead of yourself, Bella. It's a party. Anyone can get a ticket if they know the right people. I suppose one of your little florist clients felt sorry for you and passed one along. He leaned in, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that was meant to be intimidating. Just a bit of friendly advice. Try not to look too out of place. People can smell new money, or in your case, no money. He was trying to reset their old dynamic, to put her back in the box he'd built for her. She could feel the four walls of it, meek, talentless, dependent, and grateful for his scraps of attention. But the box was gone. She had torn it down herself. She gave him a serene smile. Thank you for the advice, Ethan. But I'm not worried. I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. Before he could formulate another patronizing remark, a distinguished-looking older woman in a Chanel suit approached them. Her eyes were fixed on Naomi. Excuse me, the woman said, completely ignoring Ethan and Tiffany. You are Ms. Rossi, aren't you? The artist. Naomi's heart gave a little flutter. Yes, I am. Magnificent, the woman breathed, gesturing to the installation behind her. Absolutely magnificent. The way you've captured the fragility of the serious bloom, it's poetic. My husband and I are on the museum's acquisition board. We must talk later. She handed Naomi a business card and walked away, leaving a stunned silence in her wake. Naomi tucked the card into her small clutch, her hand trembling slightly. She risked a glance at Ethan. His smile was gone. His face was a mask of confusion and disbelief. Tiffany just looked furious, her sequined dress seeming to bristle with indignation. They had come to mock the caterer, only to find the guest of honor, and the night was just getting started. Daniel Chevalier moved through the gala like a phantom. He was one of the wealthiest men in the world, a tech visionary who had revolutionized data security before pivoting to art and philanthropy. But he possessed a quiet, unassuming presence that allowed him to blend into the background. He hated these events, the performative charity and the vacuous networking. But as the host and primary benefactor of the evening, his attendance was non-negotiable. He stood near the edge of the Temple of Dender, nursing a glass of scotch and observing the crowd. His gaze was sharp, analytical, missing nothing. He saw the subtle power plays, the false smiles, the desperate social climbing. It was a human ecosystem as predictable as it was tedious. His eyes, however, kept being drawn to the floral installations. They were extraordinary. Not just decorations, but living art. They had a wild, untamed energy, a beautiful melancholy that spoke to him. He'd known the artist's work from a small gallery show he'd stumbled upon a year ago, and when the gala committee needed something spectacular, he had given his curator one instruction: find her. He had remained an anonymous benefactor by choice, wanting the art to speak for itself without the weight of his name attached. Then he saw her, the artist herself. He recognized her from the portfolio his curator had shown him. Naomi Rossi. She was standing near the grand staircase, looking even more striking in person. She wore a midnight blue gown that flowed around her like water, but it was the cascade of silver and white petals over her shoulder that held his attention. She was wearing her art. It was a bold, confident statement. He watched as a preening man in a tuxedo and a woman in a blindingly red dress cornered her. Daniel recognized the man, Ethan Hayes, a mid-level finance drone with an ego that far outstripped his accomplishments. Daniel had sat through a pitch from him once and had dismissed him as an empty suit. He watched Hayes lean in, his body language dripping with condescension. He saw the woman in red rake her eyes over Ms. Rossi, her expression a mixture of pity and contempt. Daniel was intrigued. Most people in this room would have been intimidated, flustered by such a blatant social attack. But Naomi Rossi did not flinch. She stood her ground with a quiet, unshakable poise. There was a strength in her stillness that was far more powerful than their aggression. When the woman from the acquisition board approached and spoke to her, the look on Ethan Hayes' face was, to Daniel, exquisitely satisfying. He decided it was time to make an introduction. He made his way through the crowd, his movements deliberate and silent. As he approached, he could hear the tail end of their conversation. "Don't know who you think you fooled, Bella, but this is my world. You're just a tourist," Ethan was hissing, trying desperately to regain control of the situation. "Perhaps you should reevaluate your world then," a low voice said. Ethan and Tiffany turned, annoyed at the interruption. When they saw who it was, their jaws collectively dropped. Everyone in this room knew Daniel Chevalier. He was a legend, a recluse whose presence at any event guaranteed its success. Tiffany's hostile expression melted into one of saccharine awe. Ethan's face went pale. Daniel's attention, however, was focused solely on Naomi. "Ms. Rossi," he said, his voice a warm baritone. "I'm Daniel Chevalier. I've been hoping to have the chance to meet you tonight." Naomi was momentarily stunned into silence. She knew who he was, of course. He was the city's enigmatic benefactor, the man whose name was synonymous with innovation and immense wealth. She hadn't made the connection that he could be her anonymous patron. "Mr. Chevalier," she finally managed, a faint blush rising on her cheeks. "The honor's all mine." "Please, call me Daniel," he said, his eyes crinkling at the corners in a genuine smile. He gestured to the nearest installation. "Your work is even more breathtaking in person. You have a rare gift. You don't just arrange flowers, you give them a voice." Ethan, recovering from his shock, saw an opportunity. He puffed out his chest and stepped forward, extending a hand. "Daniel, Ethan Hayes. We met last year. Hayes Capital? It's great to see you again. I'm Naomi's ex-husband. I was just telling her how proud I am. I always nurtured her little artistic side." Daniel's gaze shifted to Ethan. It was a cold, dismissive look that lasted only a second, but it carried the weight of a guillotine. He completely ignored Ethan's outstretched hand and turned his full, undivided attention back to Naomi. "Nurtured?" Daniel asked softly, his eyebrow raising almost imperceptibly. "That's an interesting choice of words. From what I've seen, a talent like yours doesn't need nurturing. It needs to be set free." The implication was clear. He had seen the entire exchange. He knew exactly what Ethan was. Tiffany, sensing a catastrophic social misstep, tried to salvage the situation. She grabbed Ethan's arm, pulling his unshaken hand back. "Mr. Chevalier, I'm Tiffany Sterling. My father is Robert Sterling of Sterling Industries. We are such admirers of your philanthropic work." Daniel gave her a brief, polite nod before his warm gaze settled back on Naomi. "Ms. Rossi, would you do me the honor of walking me through your creations? I'd love to hear about your process." It wasn't a request, it was a rescue, a clear and public dismissal of the two people who had just tried to humiliate her. "I'd love to," Naomi said, her voice filled with a gratitude that went far beyond the invitation itself. As Daniel offered her his arm and they turned to walk away, Naomi couldn't resist a final glance back at Ethan. He was frozen in place, his hands still awkwardly hovering in the space where Daniel should have been. His face was a thunderous storm of fury, humiliation, and utter bewilderment. He had just been publicly and unequivocally snubbed by the most powerful man in the room. in favor of the woman he had thrown away. And as Naomi walked away on the arm of Daniel Chevalier, a small, genuine smile touched her lips. For the first time all night, she felt completely and utterly free. Walking with Daniel Chevalier was like entering the eye of a hurricane. The noisy, swirling chaos of the gala seemed to part before them, creating a bubble of respectful silence. People stared, whispered, and wondered, but no one dared to interrupt. For Naomi, who had spent her life trying to be invisible, the feeling was both terrifying and exhilarating. But Daniel seemed oblivious to the attention. His focus was entirely on her and her work. He wasn't just making polite conversation. He was genuinely, deeply curious. "The night blooming cereus," he began, gesturing to a massive arrangement where the rare ethereal white flowers were at their peak, their sweet, heady fragrance filling the air. "They only bloom once for a single night before they die. A bold choice. Most designers would choose something with more longevity." "I think that's why they're so beautiful," Naomi replied, finding her voice. "Their beauty is precious because it's fleeting. It reminds us to be present, to appreciate the moment we're in. That was the idea behind ephemeral beauty." Daniel stopped and looked at her, his dark eyes intense. "That's a philosophy I can appreciate. In my world, everything is about permanence. Legacy, long-term investments, code that lasts for decades. We forget the value of the now." They talked for over an hour, moving from one installation to the next. He asked about the mechanics, how she managed to make heavy branches of cherry blossoms look like they were floating in midair. She explained her use of custom-built, hidden armatures and counterweights. He asked about her choice of color palettes, the subtle transition from pure white to soft greens and deep blues. She explained that it was meant to mimic the life cycle of a star, from its brilliant birth to its quiet fading. He listened not just with his ears, but with his whole being. He understood the artistry, the science, the poetry of what she did. He spoke her language. With Ethan, she had always been translating, simplifying, trying to explain her passion in terms he might value, like profit margins or social cachet. With Daniel, no translation was necessary. He just saw it. And he saw her. From across the room, Ethan watched them, a toxic cocktail of rage and jealousy churning in his stomach. "Who does she think she is?" Tiffany hissed beside him, her voice tight with fury. She had been trying to get the attention of a society columnist for the last 20 minutes, only to be ignored in favor of the spectacle of Naomi and Daniel. "And who does he think he is? Just ignoring us like that? My father could buy his little company 100 times over." "Don't be an idiot, Tiffany," Ethan snapped, his patience worn thin. "Your father couldn't afford the coffee maker in his office. That's Daniel Chevalier. He doesn't buy companies. He builds empires and lets them fail out of boredom." Ethan couldn't wrap his head around it. The scene played over and over in his mind. Daniel's dismissive gaze, Naomi's serene smile, the way they walked away together. It didn't make sense. Naomi was plain. She was quiet. She was the comfortable background wallpaper of his life, not the star of the show. Had he missed something so fundamental? The thought was terrifying, an assault on his own perception of himself as an astute judge of character and value. He watched her now, laughing at something Daniel said. She looked different. The timid, anxious woman he remembered was gone. In her place was this radiant, confident creature, holding the attention of a man who could have any woman in the world. A bitter, possessive anger rose in him. He had made her. He had taken her from her small town, brought her to New York, given her a life she could only have dreamed of. She owed her presence here in some convoluted way to him. And this was how she repaid him? By humiliating him? "He's probably just being polite," Tiffany said, trying to soothe her own bruised ego. "Or maybe she's this year's charity case. The rich love to discover a little project, someone to feel good about." But Ethan knew it was more than that. He saw the way Daniel looked at her. It was a look of genuine admiration, the same look Ethan had once seen him give a Picasso hanging in his office. It was a look that acknowledged immense, undeniable value. Meanwhile, Naomi and Daniel had found a quieter spot on a balcony overlooking the city lights. The noise of the gala faded to a pleasant hum. So the man who deals in indestructible code is drawn to the beauty of things that die, Naomi mused, a small smile playing on her lips. Perhaps, Daniel said, leaning against the balustrade, or perhaps I'm drawn to the Creator, the one who can see the universe in a flower that lives for only one night. He paused, his expression turning serious. That man from before, Ethan, he didn't see you at all, did he? The question was direct, yet gentle. Naomi's smile faded slightly. She looked out at the glittering skyline of Manhattan, a city of a million tiny lights. He saw what he wanted to see, she said softly, a reflection of himself, an accessory. When I started to become something that wasn't just about him, the reflection became distorted. He didn't like it. His loss, Daniel said simply, with a finality that felt like the closing of a book. Some people are so busy looking for shiny objects that they fail to recognize a star when it's right in front of them. A comfortable silence fell between them, filled only by the sounds of the city below. In that moment, Naomi felt a sense of peace she hadn't experienced in years. It wasn't just about being seen by a man like Daniel Chevalier. It was about realizing that her worth was not, and had never been, tied to Ethan's approval. Her value was inherent. It was in her hands, her mind, her heart. And tonight, under the watchful eyes of the entire city, she was finally starting to see it too. As the evening progressed, a palpable buzz began to circulate through the gala. The museum's director, a stately man named Mr. Abernathy, took to the stage set up in the center of the great hall. A hush fell over the crowd. "Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us," he began, his voice resonating through the vast space. "Your generosity tonight will help us continue our mission to bring art and culture to the world. And speaking of art, we have a very special announcement to make." Naomi stood with Daniel near the back of the crowd. A nervous energy fluttered in her stomach. She knew her commission was for the gala, but she hadn't been told any more than that. Daniel gave her hand a slight, reassuring squeeze. Mr. Abernathy continued. "As many of you know, we are in the process of building the new Chevalier wing for contemporary sculpture, thanks to an unprecedented endowment from our host tonight, Mr. Daniel Chevalier." A round of applause broke out. Daniel gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. Ethan and Tiffany, who had maneuvered their way to the front of the crowd to be seen, clapped enthusiastically, their faces masks of fawning admiration. "Tonight," Mr. Abernathy announced, his voice rising with excitement, "I am thrilled to unveil the very first commissioned piece for the new wing. A piece so unique, so innovative, that we decided it deserved a special preview. In fact, you have been surrounded by the artist's genius all evening." He gestured around the hall. A collective gasp went through the crowd as they looked at the floral installations with new eyes. They weren't just decorations. They were the main event. Ethan's clapping faltered. He and Tiffany exchanged a confused look. He'd assumed the flowers were from some big established event company. The idea that Naomi's hobby was the centerpiece of the entire evening seemed ludicrous. "The artist," Mr. Abernathy boomed, "has taken a medium often seen as mere decoration and elevated it to the highest form of sculpture. She explores themes of time, mortality, and transcendent beauty with a skill that our curators have called nothing short of visionary. It is my profound honor to introduce the creator of ephemeral beauty and the inaugural artist of the Chevalier wing, Ms. Naomi Rossi." A spotlight hit Naomi. For a terrifying second, she was blinded, frozen in the glare. The entire room of New York's elite turned to stare at her. Then Daniel started clapping, a slow, deliberate sound right beside her ear. Soon the entire hall erupted in thunderous applause. The blood drained from Ethan's face. His mouth hung open slightly. It felt as if the floor had dropped out from under him. Ms. Naomi Rossi, his Bella, the featured artist, the inaugural artist for the Chevalier wing, it was impossible. It was a category error, a glitch in the matrix of his perfectly ordered world. Tiffany was staring, her face a grotesque mask of shock and envy. Her perfectly painted red lips were pressed into a thin, white line. The woman she had dismissed as a crafty hobbyist, a social climbing nobody, was being celebrated, lauded by the very people whose approval Tiffany so desperately craved. The humiliation was a physical thing, hot and suffocating. Naomi, guided by a gentle nudge from Daniel, began to walk toward the stage. Her legs felt like they were moving through water. The faces in the crowd were a blur, but the applause was a physical wave of acceptance and admiration, washing over her, cleansing her of years of self-doubt. She reached the stage and shook Mr. Abernathy's hand. He beamed at her. "Naomi, your work is a triumph," he whispered. "Daniel was right about you." She turned to face the crowd, her heart pounding against her ribs. She scanned the sea of faces until she found them. Ethan and Tiffany. They were standing stock still, looking up at her. For the first time, she saw him not as the powerful, intimidating man who had defined her life, but as a small, bewildered man, utterly lost. The pitying smile he had always given her was gone, replaced by a raw, naked bewilderment. "Thank you," Naomi said into the microphone, her voice trembling only slightly. "Thank you, Mr. Abernathy and the museum board. And thank you to the benefactor who gave me this incredible opportunity, who trusted me with this vision." Her eyes found Daniel's in the crowd, and she gave him a small, grateful smile. "I've always believed," she continued, gaining confidence with every word, "that there is immense power and beauty in things that are fragile, in things that we are told are temporary or unimportant. True art isn't about what lasts forever. It's about what moves us, right here, right now. Thank you." Another wave of applause washed over her. It was a validation so profound it brought tears to her eyes. She had done it, not to spite Ethan, not to prove him wrong, but for herself. She had taken her passion, the thing he had belittled and dismissed, and she had turned it into something no one could ignore. She had made her mark, not with a permanent name on a building, but with a moment of breathtaking, ephemeral beauty. And in doing so, she had become permanent. The applause eventually subsided, but the shock waves from the announcement continued to ripple through the gala. Naomi was immediately swarmed by well-wishers, collectors, and gallery owners, all pressing their business cards into her hand. Daniel remained quietly by her side, a protective, grounding presence that kept the crowd from becoming overwhelming. Ethan and Tiffany had been swept to the side, rendered irrelevant. They stood in stunned silence, watching the woman they had mocked become the center of the universe. The rage finally broke through Ethan's shock. This was a personal affront, a public castration. She had orchestrated this entire night just to humiliate him. It was the only explanation his narcissistic mind could conjure. "I'm going to talk to her," he snarled, pushing past a waiter. "Ethan, don't!" Tiffany hissed, grabbing his arm. "You'll make a scene." "I don't care," he shot back, shaking her off. "She owes me an explanation." He bulldozed his way through the crowd until he reached the small circle surrounding Naomi. excuse me," he said, his voice loud and abrasive. The circle parted, and he found himself face to face with his ex-wife. "Bella, a word," he demanded, not asked. The well-wishers awkwardly melted away, sensing the impending drama. Daniel's expression hardened, but he remained silent, letting Naomi handle it. "There's nothing left to say, Ethan," Naomi said, her voice calm and level. "Oh, I think there is," he sneered, his voice low and venomous. "This is quite a performance. I have to hand it to you. Seducing Daniel Chevalier to get a commission? It's more ambitious than I ever gave you credit for. How much did you have to pay, or who did you have to pay, to get Abernathy to say all that?" The accusation was so vile, so steeped in his own transactional view of the world, that Naomi almost laughed. The man standing before her was a stranger. "You still don't get it, do you?" she said, a sad sort of pity in her eyes. "You think the only way a woman can achieve something is by attaching herself to a powerful man. It never occurred to you that the power, the talent, could be her own. This has nothing to do with you, Ethan. It never did." "Nothing to do with me?" He spat, his face turning red. "I gave you everything. I supported your silly little flower hobby. You would be nothing without me. You'd still be in a small town, arranging daisies for the local church fete. And you'd still be a mid-level analyst, using my ideas to get ahead," she retorted, the words sharp and clean. "Who do you think came up with the investment strategy that got you your first big promotion? Who wrote the speeches that made you sound so charming and intelligent? You didn't support me, Ethan. You used me. You mined me for my creativity and then told me I was worthless." Every word was a hammer blow to his fragile ego. His entire sense of self was built on the idea that he was the genius, the star, and she was his devoted, simple acolyte. She was rewriting the history he had so carefully constructed. Tiffany, seeing her own status threatened by this public unraveling, decided to intervene. "She's just jealous," she announced to the onlookers who were pretending not to listen. "She can't stand that Ethan moved on and found someone on his own level. It's pathetic, really, clinging to a man like Mr. Chevalier for a little bit of fame." At the mention of his name, Daniel finally stepped forward. He moved with a lethal calm, placing himself slightly in front of Naomi. "Mr. Hayes," Daniel said, his voice dangerously quiet, "I believe I have made it clear that your presence is not welcome here. You are embarrassing yourself." Ethan bristled. "You stay out of this. This is between me and my ex-wife. Naomi is no longer your wife, and you are no longer speaking to her," Daniel stated, not as a suggestion, but as a fact. "I saw your behavior earlier tonight. You are a petty, insecure man who was threatened by a woman of substance. You were blind to the treasure you had, and now you're throwing a tantrum because someone else can see her clearly. Let me be the one to clarify things for you. I sought out Ms. Rossi for her talent, a talent you were too arrogant and foolish to ever recognize. She earned this commission. She earned this night. The only thing you ever gave her was the freedom that came when you left." The public denunciation was absolute. Ethan stood there, stripped bare in front of the very people he had spent his life trying to impress. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. He was defeated, and he knew it. He looked at Naomi, truly looked at her, and saw the strong, brilliant, celebrated woman on the stage. He saw the admiration in Daniel Chevalier's eyes, and in that moment, the full, crushing weight of his miscalculation landed on him. He hadn't just lost a wife. He had discarded a masterpiece. As Ethan stood there, paralyzed by his own monumental failure, Daniel turned to Naomi. The anger in his eyes softened as he looked at her, replaced by a deep, profound respect. He gently touched her cheek, his thumb stroking her skin. The entire room seemed to hold its breath. "You are magnificent," he whispered, for her alone to hear. And then he leaned in and kissed her. It was not a kiss of passion or possession. It was a kiss of coronation. It was tender and firm, a public declaration of her worth, her beauty, her strength. It was a seal on the evening, a final, undeniable statement. Ethan froze. The sound in his ears faded to a dull roar. The sight before him, the woman he had deemed unremarkable being kissed by the man he most wanted to be, was like a physical blow. It was the end point of all his choices, the grand, humiliating finale to the story of his success. His new wife, his status, his wealth, it all turned to ash in his mouth. He had played the game and lost in the most spectacular way possible, because he had never even understood what the prize was. He just stood there, a hollow man in a Tom Ford suit, utterly and completely frozen. The kiss ended, but the moment lingered, suspended in the silent, charged air of the great hall. The ambient chatter of the gala, which had ceased entirely, returned not as a roar, but as a cascade of hushed, feverish whispers. For Naomi, the sound was a distant echo, drowned out by the steady, powerful rhythm of her own heart. Her cheeks were flushed, but it wasn't from embarrassment. It was the warmth of vindication, a heat that radiated from her core. When she looked into Daniel's dark eyes, she saw none of the triumph of a conqueror, only a deep, profound, and unwavering respect. It was in that gaze that she knew the entire evening, the confrontation, and even the kiss, had been about celebrating her, not shaming Ethan. Without a word, a silent understanding passing between them, he took her hand. His fingers laced through hers, a gesture that felt less like a claim and more like an anchor. "I think it's time we left," he said, his voice a low, calm murmur meant only for her. She nodded, a sense of closure so complete it was almost dizzying washing over her. The Naomi who had arrived hours earlier, trembling with anxiety, would never have had the strength to walk through this room with her head held high. But the woman who left on Daniel Chevalier's arm was different. As they moved toward the grand entrance, the sea of New York's elite parted for them once more. Naomi did not look for Ethan or Tiffany in the crowd. She felt no need to witness their humiliation. They were figures from a past life, ghosts at a feast to which they were no longer invited. Her focus was on the solid warmth of Daniel's hand and the path forward. The crisp night air was a welcome shock to her senses as they emerged from the museum. The frenzy of the paparazzi had intensified tenfold. A wall of blinding flashes erupted, and a cacophony of questions assaulted them from all sides. "Mr. Chevalier, is this an official announcement? Ms. Rossi, how does it feel to be the art world's new star? Are you two a couple?" Daniel moved seamlessly, his body creating a subtle protective shield for her without ever appearing aggressive. He guided her toward a sleek, black Maybach waiting at the curb, the driver holding the door open. As they settled into the plush, cream-colored leather of the interior, the heavy door swung shut, and the chaotic world outside was instantly silenced, replaced by a serene, insulated quiet. The car pulled away from the curb, gliding through the illuminated streets of Manhattan with a silence that felt sacred. The city's vibrant lights painted fleeting, abstract patterns across Daniel's face. For a long moment, they simply sat, the shared silence a comfortable blanket. "The way you stood up to him," Daniel said, finally breaking the quiet, his voice thoughtful. "You didn't raise your voice. You didn't trade insults. You simply spoke the truth. That requires a strength most people don't possess." Naomi turned to look at him, at the man who had seen through all her defenses to the core of who she was. "For a very long time, I didn't think I possessed it either," she confessed, her voice soft. "I'm better than all right," she added, the truth of the words settling deep within her. "I feel clear. The noise in my head, the voice that always told me I wasn't enough. Ethan's voice, I suppose. It's finally gone. All this time, I thought a piece of me was missing, that he had taken it with him. But it was never missing, was it?" "Never," Daniel affirmed, his gaze unwavering. "It was just buried under years of being told to be quiet, to be small. Tonight, you decided to stand up. The rest of the world is just starting to see what you've had in you all along." He leaned forward and spoke to the driver, providing an address that Naomi didn't recognize. The car bypassed the familiar route to her small apartment in the village and instead headed uptown, toward the glittering spires of Billionaire's Row. They rode in a private elevator that opened directly into a breathtaking penthouse apartment. It was a space of stunning, minimalist elegance. Polished concrete floors, vast walls showcasing a few carefully chosen modern art masterpieces, and furniture that was both beautiful and functional. But the true art was the view. An entire wall was made of glass, revealing a panoramic, godlike perspective of Central Park and the city skyline. He led her to the window and they stood side by side, looking down at the river of light that was Fifth Avenue, the dark, sleeping heart of the park, and the million tiny, glittering lives spread out before them. He poured them both a glass of deep red wine from a bottle that was already open on a marble counter, and the simple clink of their glasses was the only sound. "Thank you, Daniel," Naomi said, her voice filled with an emotion that went deeper than simple gratitude. "For tonight, for the commission, of course, but more than that, thank you for stepping in, and thank you for stepping back. You defended me, but you also let me fight my own battle." "I would never presume to fight your battles for you," he said, turning to face her, the city lights creating a halo around his silhouette. "I only stepped in when he ceased to argue and began to attack. There's a difference." He paused, his expression turning serious. "Naomi, what I said tonight was not just for show. Your talent is a rare, powerful thing. This commission for the gala, it was a test in a way. I wanted to see what you would create if given complete freedom, and you exceeded every possible expectation. This can't be a one-time thing." He took a step closer, his intensity palpable. "I want to be your patron, officially, not as an anonymous client, but as a partner. I want to give you the resources, the space, the absolute freedom to create whatever you can dream of. Think of it, a dedicated studio, access to any material, any technology, a permanent, kinetic installation for the atrium of my foundation's headquarters in Geneva, one that changes with the light and the seasons. A solo show in Paris, where we don't just rent a gallery, we transform it into one of your living landscapes. No budgets, no restrictions, no compromises, just your vision." The offer was staggering, a universe of possibility opening up before her. For a fleeting second, the old voice of doubt flickered. Can I do that? Am I good enough? But then she looked at Daniel's face, at the steady, absolute belief in his eyes, and the flicker was extinguished. He wasn't offering her a gift. He was offering her a key to a door she had built herself but had never known how to unlock. Tears welled in her eyes, not of sadness, but of overwhelming cathartic release. I don't know what to say, she whispered, the words catching in her throat. You don't have to say anything, he said gently. Just say yes. A single tear escaped and traced a path down her cheek. She didn't wipe it away. Yes, she said, her voice clear and firm. Yes. They talked for the rest of the night. As the hours melted away, they moved from the window to the comfortable sofas, the wine glasses forgotten. It was a conversation of exhilarating discovery. She spoke of her grandmother's garden, where she first learned the secret language of flowers. He spoke of the sublime mathematical elegance of a perfectly written line of code. They found the unexpected poetry that connected their two worlds, the structured chaos of nature and the organic beauty of pure logic. It was an unfolding, a recognition of two souls that, despite their vastly different journeys, spoke the same essential language. Slowly, imperceptibly, the inky black of the sky began to soften, bleeding into shades of deep violet and soft gray. Daniel led her to a wide balcony, and they stepped out into the cool, pre-dawn air. The city was quieter now, breathing a soft, collective sigh before the chaos of a new day. Naomi leaned against the railing, watching as the first hint of rose and gold kissed the horizon. The artificial lights of the city below began to seem pale and insignificant in the face of the approaching sun. She was no longer just Naomi Rossi, the florist. She was not Ethan Hayes' ex-wife. She was an artist, a visionary, a woman who had walked through the fire of her past and had emerged not burned, but forged into something stronger and more brilliant. The ghost that had haunted her for so long was finally gone, banished by the undeniable light of a new sunrise. Her future was a vast, empty canvas, and for the first time, she held the brush, her hands steady and sure. Daniel came to stand beside her, not speaking, not touching her, but simply sharing the moment, a silent, steadfast partner as she looked out at her new world. That night wasn't just an ending to Naomi's painful past, it was a spectacular beginning. It's a powerful reminder that our worth is never determined by those who refuse to see it. Sometimes the greatest act of revenge is not revenge at all, but living a life so full and beautiful that those who hurt you become nothing more than a footnote in your incredible story. Naomi found her voice, her power, and her art, not by seeking validation from others, but by finally giving it to herself. Her story proves that the right person will never try to diminish your light. They'll hand you a match and help you set the whole world ablaze. If Naomi's journey from heartache to triumph resonated with you, please show your support. Hit that like button, share this story with someone who needs to be reminded of their own strength, and subscribe for more stories of karmic justice and empowerment. What did you think of Ethan's reaction? Let us know in the comments below.